Back in action at the State House. Lawmakers are already hitting on major topics in week one. The primary focus this session will be the budget battle. The governor touched on some concepts in his pitch in the State of the State on Monday, but now we are seeing the actual paperwork and the numbers and ideas in depth. Well, Joe Parris is following the budget proposals in JFAC. What does this all kind of center on?
Well, the hanging question is centered on really Medicaid cuts. How do the numbers all fall there, Hunter? And now that we actually have the paperwork in the budget proposal, the real debates begin. So the governor talked about cuts during his State of the State, but didn't specify in detail exactly what those millions in cuts could include. And now, according to budget documents, we know in his proposal, some cost-saving measures come as follows in Medicaid cuts: removal of the pharmacy benefit for non-expansion adults on Medicaid, removal of adult dental services, removal of home and community-based services, the removal of physical, occupational, and speech therapy services, removal of case management, removal of hospice. The list goes on and does also include some things like chiropractic services and, most notably, as some people have pointed out, adult audiology services as well as vision services. And that list that you see there is basically all of them. We could read it all, but it would take the whole show. But basically, the budget proposal was presented by the Department of Financial Management, the administrator, Lori Wolf, and she discussed the real-world conversations, the reality of picking cuts.
Every single cut that we had to make has impacts. In some cases, there are going to be cost shifts as we're saving in other areas. I know in Medicaid, which is one of the reasons we want to work with all of you on some of those additional statutory changes, we have to take a good look at what we are funding and what some of those impacts are. I think every single Medicaid decision we make, we're going to have to be thoughtful about those things we reduce and how we make sure we look at that continuum of care.
On another topic, the governor committed to no K-12 cuts during his State of the State, but his budget actually targets accountability in that sector, specifically online education. He proposed $23 million in cuts from virtual public school funding by eliminating supplemental learning funds as well as transportation funding for virtual schools. Supplemental funds are the ones we covered late last year. That's money that was sent to virtual school families in the public school sector to cover education costs. A legislative audit found that money was being spent on non-education funds, or arguably non-education funds, depending on your perspective. Paddle boards, video game controllers, Disney Plus accounts were popular examples from the OPE report. In addition, $10 million proposed to cut through the Idaho Digital Learning Academy. The goal here, they say, is to right-size public funding for it.
The governor knows that IDLA is an important part in many situations. My kids took IDLA courses. It offers flexibility. What we're trying to do here is just make sure, as we look at this 300% growth in what we're paying in online schools, and yet our classroom we're still struggling with discretionary funding to be able to do maintenance and basic things there. We need to look at what are we funding, how do we do this, and how do we right-size it.
And in a higher overarching sense, there's an expected conversation in JFAC that's already ongoing, a debate about the revenue projections for the state of Idaho, as well as costs to the state from the One Big Beautiful Bill, specifically the tax conformity questions on cuts, something that Governor Little and lawmakers, they want to opt into those cuts that were passed federally and conform the state code with the federal code. The fiscal year 2027 budget projects a total general fund revenue of $5.68 billion, with expenditures of $5.63 billion, leaving a tight ending balance of about $25.5 million. So questions remain about how revenue numbers will actually look. There are projections right now, and debate centers on controversy from last session and how they got to numbers.
We're in the position we're in because this committee didn't vote on a revenue number until late. And then we backed our expenses into the revenue number we wanted so we could do some tax cuts. And now we're going to suffer for it. And I think, I'm strapped in. I know it's going to be a rough ride, but I would hope that we would all work together to recognize why we're here.
Last year we had some challenges, a lot of challenges. This year is going to be easy, okay? So on revenue, our plan is we've got Economic Outlet Committee Wednesday, Thursday this week, and our hope is that we can all come together on Friday and set the revenue right up front so we don't have that problem like last year, okay?
Several components of the budget require legislative action through policy bills, so not just numbers, like the policies behind them. And that includes tax conformity, Medicaid reductions and changes, and the online school funding changes we talked about. Also, a request to use interest from savings accounts, aka rainy day funds, for the general fund, which means not technically using the principal funds, but again, the interest that by statute is supposed to go somewhere else. The proposal from the governor is seeking permission for a one-time change on that. Hunter, we can see that lawmakers in JFAC, some clearly not thrilled with the proposal, some heavy questions, and we're going to follow that up with the co-chair of JFAC on Friday, Josh Tanner.
Already some big debate there, and also, you know, something to mention, easy. I'd like easy to be the word.
Super easy.
That'd be nice. All right, Joe, thanks.